The Outsider podcast shares the opinions and analyses of Drew Landry. They are his thoughts, and his thoughts alone, and do not necessarily reflect every member of his audience or newsletter readers. Now, on with the show.
Hey, welcome into another episode of the Outsider Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Drew Landry, and thank you for listening to the best politics podcast west of I-35 out here in West Texas. It means a lot to me that you've joined me today. In today's episode, I have a really good interview with Suzanne Bell-Snyder, who is a journalist, a political insider at one time, someone trying to possibly change the Republican Party from the inside. A lot of good information in that interview, and so I want you to hear that interview in its entirety. So with that in mind, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on my content that I have for you. We'll do that another time. But I do want to mention, before I get into the interview with Suzanne Bell-Snyder, is the early voting totals. All right. Where this has happened, for the first time in a long time, it's been a more competitive early vote total than we've ever seen. Okay? Now, I'm recording this before the early vote totals have been released. But by the time that I have edited this and given it to you, the totals will be had. So with that in mind, when I'm recording this right now, that the people have chosen to vote in the Democratic primary more than they have chosen to vote in the Republican primary. Now, why do I say it like that? Because Texas has an open, semi-open primary. What that means is that when you go up to the polls, you choose which party's primary in which you want to vote. When you choose that party's primary, you are saying that you are part of that party for the next 2 years. So that's why it's called a semi-open, semi-open, open primary that we have in the Lone Star State. So that's why I say it that way, is that people are choosing the Democratic ticket over the Republican ticket in this primary season so far in this early vote. Now, Election Day is not until Tuesday, March the 3rd, and look, anything can happen then. You might have a gigantic Republican turnout on Election Day, but I'm here to tell you that with the way things are going, as I'm recording this, we are looking at I say near historic because it is, in a long time, a big turnout for the Democrats. For those who have voted in the Democratic primary, it's been as high as it's been in a very long time. What else we need to understand is that the Republicans are on pace to not do so well, not have a big turnout in the state and in Lubbock County. For the first time, really since 2008, we have seen the people choosing to vote in the Democratic primary in pretty big numbers. I mean, by the time I'm recording this, I keep having to say that because I don't want you to forget. When I'm recording this, those who have voted in the Democratic primary, they have not only reached, they have exceeded who voted in their primary in 2022, who voted in their primary in 2018, who voted in the primary in 2014. You get the idea. And you're talking about 20-some thousand people voted in the Democratic primary in 2008. Now, there was a reason for that. That was a little bit of a strategy. It's called Operation Chaos. You had Republicans trying to vote for Hillary Clinton to kind of rig to sabotage the election, because they thought John McCain would have an easier time going up against Hillary Clinton than Barack Obama. But there was a different situation back then. Then Texas had what's called the Texas two-step, which means you vote in the primary, then you show up to the caucus. It was weird. It was stupid. And just be glad that it's gone. That said, those people who voted for Hillary in the primary didn't show up for the caucus, and so Obama ended up with more delegates than Hillary did. So even though she ended up, she won the vote in Texas on Election Day, because of this big turnout, it didn't really help her out all that much. What's that mean for 2026? It means that the Democrats are actually on pace in Lubbock County to vote more than they have since 2008. Okay, like you're talking like maybe they'll get to 8,000 or 9,000 people. That's a pretty big margin. And while you may think that's not a big deal, and that, well, if you're used to Republicans, voting in like, 22, 25, 29, 30,000 people voting in that Republican primary, you only having 9,000, 10,000 right now, and again, when I'm recording this, that means that by the time early voting ends, you're only at you're maybe going to get to 15,000. So that's not exactly the number that you're looking for. And if you're expecting this like 30,000 people to vote in the Republican primary, you're expecting a 100% turnout, like 100% more people to actually come into Lubbock County and vote in the Republican primary. I don't think that's going to happen. So you're going to see a low turnout. That's for the Republicans. That's crazy. You're going to see a pretty high turnout for Democrats. That's crazy. And this is turning into a highly participated election for Lubbock County because of the Democratic, because of those voting in the Democratic primary. You're also seeing more people vote in this primary period. So I'll have numbers for you. All right, I will show them here, and you can see how the total numbers are. But what is interesting the most is this excitement taking place, as it seems like these competitive primaries are possibly turning out this high turnout election, this high turnout for voters statewide. Now, you got to think of the question why. Why is that happening? Well, I'm always somebody who tries to find out the why. I'm all about the why. All right, but that takes a minute for us to really figure that out. I've boiled it down to one of two things. Either there's a legit Democratic enthusiasm that those who haven't voted in a long time in the Democratic primary are now voting in the Democratic primary. Those who have often voted in the Republican primary are now voting in the Democratic primary. So maybe there is this genuine sense of enthusiasm that Democrats are showing across the state. Perhaps that's actually happening. That's option one. Option two is crossover voting. And that's one of the symptoms of the open, semi-open primary. What that means, what I mean by crossover voting, is that you could possibly have some Republicans who would normally vote in Republican primaries say, I'm going to vote in that Democratic primary because I want so-and-so to win that race. That is totally, that could totally be it. Or the fact that there could be a third option. Republicans are just planning to vote on Election Day. Maybe they don't really want to do early voting, which is wild to me because early voting is very popular in Texas. But maybe they're thinking Election Day is going to be it for me. I don't want to do early voting. Forget early voting. Election Day's it. That could be the case. I don't know. Maybe they'll have like a 70% turnout on the final day of early voting. You got me there too. I don't know. But by the time that I'm recording this, there's a lot of questions that we have to answer. that we'll eventually answer. You know, is there truly a democratic enthusiasm taking place on that side of the aisle? Or are Republicans saying, I don't care who wins the primary. I don't care who wins with John Cornyn, Kim Paxton, Wesley Hunt. I don't care. We are going to take that seat no matter what. And I want Tallarico to be the Dem nominee, or I want Jasmine Crockett to be the Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate. Those are some possible responses. Those are some possible answers. Again, we don't know, but those are the two things that are coming to my head. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here, but I'm always open to conversation. But it's pretty wild that in a historically Republican turnout more Republican turnout primary vote state like Texas, you're having more Democrats. Well, again, I need to rephrase that. More people choosing the Democratic ballot than you have in many years prior. And that's even true in Lubbock, Texas, in Lubbock County. Okay? So this isn't just like, oh, well, you're seeing overvotes in the metroplexes. No, you're seeing this in Lubbock County. And that's pretty interesting. Okay. That said, I want to show you now, I want to give you my interview with Suzanne Belsnider, and I really hope you enjoy it. And here's my interview with Suzanne Belsnider, who is one of the best and top political reporters really throughout the state, especially in rural Texas, up in the Panhandle. And Suzanne, thanks for being on the Outsider Podcast. It's an honor to have you on.
Well, thank you, Drew. I'm glad we made this happen. This is going to be fun.
Absolutely. So walk us through a little bit about your background as to, what got you into politics, what got you working for these candidates, and what got you into media?
Yeah. Well, so I am a Panhandle girl, born and raised in my little community of Hansford County. But my mom will tell you that even like in like sixth grade, I had already decided that I was going to Austin and I was going to get work in the Capitol. So apparently I had my eyes set on that really early. Who knows? I guess maybe some people are just born with a weird political gene, but apparently I got it. So I did. I graduated from my little high school and went off to University of Texas. Mostly picked that because of Austin and the Capitol. And I got real active actually in college Republicans politics. So I mean, I literally was like a grassroots activist at University of Texas. So here's this little conservative, Spearman girl taking on UT liberals, and even in my professor. So it was a lot of fun. And then I fell into meeting elected officials through that. And then eventually I ended up working in the state capitol. So after I graduated, I did a short stint at the Railroad Commission, and then I ended up in the Texas Senate with Florence Shapiro. And I worked, probably 3 or 4 sessions for her there in the state capitol. I left the Capitol when I became a mom because that life is very hard on families. And so family was important to me. And then I went out into the political side of things and did some fundraising and grassroots work for political candidates for several years, probably a decade. And then I made the decision to move back to the Panhandle. So that sort of sets the stage for my most recent journey. There's not a lot of need for political consultants in Hansford County. So that part of my life sort of changed. And I actually had intended just to get out of politics completely. I helped my dad a little bit with the farm, and then I got involved in local government, economic development, and some different things like that. But one of the things that I always recognized even during those years was that um, there is really not a lot of information that's relevant that gets out to rural Texas. And so, me understanding legislative process and knowing the inner workings of the Capitol, I struggled with having good information. And so we just sort of identified that that gap was there. For several years, there were a group of us that had talked about trying to do something on that, in that arena of trying to, build some kind of information source. And we just never really did it. And then in 20, I think it was 21, I had the opportunity to buy my local newspaper. A friend of mine who owned it at the time, the editor of it at the time, she was basically moving out of town and was wanting to kind of, have somebody run the paper that was local and could do all of that. And I had helped her with some advertising and things like that. So anyway, so that fell into my lap, and that sort of opened the door to me under kind of becoming a part of the media. And sort of, I guess it sort of brought all the pieces together, of my life experience, and then this need for, trying to put some kind of information source in place. And so I became a newspaper editor, and then discovered Substack and realized that I could write the columns that I wrote every week for my local paper. I could get a little bit bigger audience. And so that's kind of how all this came about. That's why I like to call myself an accidental journalist because I did not intend to be in this place doing what I'm doing now. So
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
that is a fantastic story. But you were recently interviewed by the Texas Tribune, who's also another fantastic reporter in our area, Jamie Lozano Carver,
Yes.
and who tells great stories on our side of the state, very much necessary. And in that piece, you detailed how you worked for or you helped elect Governor Greg Abbott. Um, Talk with me about how that, like, how you got involved in that, and how did you like start to realize that maybe I don't want to be part of that anymore?
Well, so as I detailed that journey as a Republican, conservative Republican, college Republican at UT, that was in the time period of when Republicans actually didn't have a majority in the state of Texas. The Democrats still held all the statewide offices. They held majorities in both the Texas House and the Texas Senate, and so Republicans at that time were sitting on the sidelines. And so I was, I always say I was at the Republican Revolution. When people call me a rhino, that's my favorite thing to say. I was like, actually, no, sorry, you can say that, but it has no bearing here. My credentials are solid. Um, but so yeah, so at that time, folks like Abbott were just literally like they were like baby, Republican elected officials on, in court. Abbott was in a court seat at that time. Um, Cornyn was on the Supreme Court, so we basically, so I worked in those early stages with the formation of the Republican Party. And of course, at that time, a party that was, they weren't moderate because Texas Republicans have never been moderate. I'll just be honest. What we are experiencing now in the party is extremism. And so I would say that Republicans at that time were more economic focused and more practical about, I call them kitchen table issues, about focusing on the things that really impact people's day to day lives. Um, and then, our job was to convert Democrats into Republicans based on those values, and then go and win Republican seats from Democrats based on those values. So it was a very values driven, issue driven, time, and that is who people like Governor Abbott are. And so that's what's hard. That's what's become hard for me is to have been in the trenches around issues and issue-based campaigns and things like that that really drove, why we were all Republicans and what we were trying to do for the state, to kind of be where we are now, where some of these folks just are not recognizable, to be honest. And I think, if you talk to any Republican that is outside of that inner circle of the governor or lieutenant governor, they're going to tell you the same thing. I mean, you can't say it out loud because you get blackballed, which, that I would say I'm probably on that list now, whether it's aggressive or not, I'm definitely no longer considered part of the team. But, I haven't changed. It's the political landscape has changed, and these candidates have adjusted to the landscape and instead of trying to stay steady and focused on our values. And so that's why I've sort of decided it was important to start to speak up.
So you were there when, towards the end of Ann Richards's, governorship, the beginning of
Yep.
George W. Bush coming in as governor. You were there
Yes.
when Bob Bullock was the lieutenant governor.
Yes.
Pete Laney was the House Speaker.
Yes, sir.
So a very different time in Texas history, in Texas politics, where the seeds were being planted for the Texas realignment. And
Yes.
now you see things as maybe gone a little too far. Is that a fair
Yeah.
statement?
Definitely fair. And I will say, even up until about 10 years ago, the Republican Party still operated, um, under that let's do what's best for Texas. They worked across the aisle with Democrats, Republicans, worked across the aisle, focused on Texas. When Bush was governor, Pete Laney was Speaker of the House and Bob Bullock was the Speaker of the Senate. Bullock and Laney were both Democrats, although Laney was a good old West Texas Democrat. So, but those guys literally had a Friday morning breakfast to talk about, okay, what can we do that's good for Texas next week? Hell, you can hardly, until this session, you couldn't even get the three Republicans to sit down together to do that. Um, so something shifted, and I have my theories about what has happened to the party, and it's not even Trump related. I think this was started in Texas even before Trump. I mean, a lot of people would say that MAGA has changed the party, but there was an orchestrated effort that started about 10 or 12 years ago, by Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilkes, and they built a network of conservative organizations, political consultants, candidates. I mean, they've got stylists, they've got all kinds of crazy stuff at all levels. And they created this little movement within the Republican Party. And that's what's pulling the party into the extremist, even more than Trump.
Yeah.
Um,
It,
and
it's
so,
interesting. It's interesting that you say that because that later became known as Empower Texans,
yes,
and then that morphed into something else. But and they had their list of people who they went after. Kel Seliger was on a list of people they wanted to go after. They tried, couldn't get him, and then
yes,
they eventually he does go. Ken King. State Representative Ken King, who's got a massively large land-wise
yes,
district. They've been going after him for a very long time.
yes.
So it just seems like that to kind of follow up on your point, um, they have it's like some of these conservative Republicans who everybody in the area would know that they are
Mhm.
conservative without a doubt, just isn't really on their team.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
So what we're dealing with is not a values principle conversation. They want to make us feel like that's what it is, but it's about power and loyalty. And that's hard for Republicans to talk about because we've always said, oh, the Democrats say that, right? But that's exactly what's happening is, um, the there's a loyalty test that happens, and if you don't pass it by these organizations or these, this operation, then if they can't control you, they don't want you in office, and
Yeah.
that's just the bottom line. Um, and this is way more sophisticated than anybody wants to admit. I got in the trenches this cycle with some of the very conservative members of our party who opposed vouchers. We built a little coalition of conservatives against vouchers. Um, and my eyes were opened to the sophistication level of what was happening. I don't even think that, like, most consultants or even like the governor, I don't think they really acknowledge what it is because they benefit from it now. But it's literally a cancer that has attacked the Republican Party. And so you've taken a small sect and they've been empowered with a billionaire's money, unlimited money. And they're all basically responsive to that. And it's kind of crazy. But it's partly so that faction has so much power that they're able to pull our elected officials now to that more extremist side of the position. So, and then it just got really complicated last cycle with vouchers because before the voucher fight, these guys kind of were not super effective, right? Like, and the only reason they got so many of their folks elected last cycle was because the governor ended up siding with some of those candidates and pumping money into those races. So they made, the governor's office made the situation worse by aligning themselves with some of these crazies. And it's been interesting to watch. And this is a very complicated conversation for a guy sitting at the coffee shop in Spearman, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's the problem. And then, part of the apparatus of what this conservative kind of group was doing was a communication apparatus. And so they've been building an email list that goes direct into the mailboxes of conservatives for the last 15 years. And guess what? Now they own the message on so many of these issues. So so it's kind of wild what's happened. And it's part of the reason I think I'm back in the fight is I feel like, if we want to have a successful Republican Party in the state of Texas, we're going to have to talk about these things. It's like it's our actual elephant in the room, right? That we've got to talk about. So
yeah, and so that leads me to this question. I don't know if you've ever been asked this. I would imagine you probably have, but I don't know. When you talk about I mean, these are key criticisms that just about anybody outside of the Republican Party would say. And when you talk about this area, the rural areas, you've had a consistent, and even in the legislature, the Democrats have been very much against the whole school voucher fight with a coalition of some very rural Republicans, and rural health care. You hear Democrats talk about that. So this is a question that is kind of writing itself. Why keep voting in the Republican primary, as it seems like
yeah.
that they would see that you are kind of rewarding them no matter what they do.
Right. Yes, I have been asked this a lot, and I've thought about it a lot. There's a couple of reasons. Number one, I am a Republican. I mean, I'm a
Mhm.
conservative. I believe in, fiscal responsibility, small government. Um, I'm an economic conservative. I'm also a Christian, so I do believe in the social issues as well, with some limitations. But I also love people. So anytime that government is doing anything that's hurtful to people, then I'm pretty much against that. So, but so I guess that my struggle is that I am a Republican. So I'm
Mhm.
always going to vote Republican.
Yeah.
Um, and then I would argue, and of course I'll probably make some Democrats mad, but the Democrats aren't offering a great alternative, right? I mean, I think that this cycle you're seeing a little bit more out of that in terms of
Mhm.
like someone like Gina and then of course Tallarico, where
Mhm.
they're actually trying to give Texans another vision for Texas. But the Democrats they gave up. They got their butts beat, and they
Yeah.
sort of just gave up
Hmm.
for like 20 years or 30 years. I mean, that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And so the Democrats have a lot of work to do to rebuild trust with, Republicans. And it's they can do that. But but then also there's a third piece to that, which is if the Democrat Party is not putting up competitive candidates, then in rural Texas, your only option is to vote in the Republican
Yeah.
primary because
Yeah.
the election of consequence happens in that primary for our local races, and those really matter more than anything.
Hmm.
So there's a couple of reasons why I continue to vote Republican, and I think a lot of other Texans do as well. Is because of kind of those particular things. So,
Yeah.
but Texas benefits from a competitive system. So we've got to have good competitive Republican primaries. We've got to have good competitive Democrat primaries, and then we can go to November and we can fight it out head to head. But what's happening in Texas is we are being disserved by this political system where only the extremists of our party get elected in these primaries. And then our choices are just not great when we get to the
Hmm.
November election. And I think that that's kind of where we are right now. I think there's some hope with the Democrats this cycle really putting up a little bit more, of a slate, then maybe there's some challenges to that. And as of today, the Democrats have outvoted the Republicans in early voting, which is interesting, by like maybe 100,000 votes or something. So maybe there's something, happening there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. That you made several good points. I don't want to just say that there was one. You made a lot of good points there. And yeah, when we talk about what was and what is now, I mean, I think you hit a really good nail on the head when you said that, in the early 2000s, it seems like that the Democrats just said, we got nothing.
Yeah.
This is all, we've lost. And then they were like Don Quixote and, just out in the wilderness. And it seemed like that there was like a flash in the pan like moment in 2018 when O'Rourke comes out of nowhere and gives a really good challenge to Ted Cruz, and he had his slate of candidates, which I must admit I was on that. I was on the ballot in 2018. Got a whopping 22% of the vote. All right, go me. But so there are some listeners and some people who watch this who like to remind me of that. But you don't have to. I'm well aware. So, but but
It's hard.
you make a good point when you have to have candidates to actually run for these things. And it's easier for Republicans than it is for Democrats to do that. And I think that speaks to a point that you're making is that, well, if no Democrat's going to run out here, my only choice is in the Republican primary.
Right.
And so
Right.
that's on them as much as is on anybody else. Um, so what just just a small moment here on this, and then we'll move on. What do you think is the future of the Republicans here? Is it going to be more extremism? Do you think that, with this weird happening in this primary where people are voting more in the Democratic primary than they are in the Republican one at this moment? Does that mean anything to you that about the future of the party?
So I had a really great mentor when I worked in the Capitol, and one of the things that he told me was that the pendulum shifts, and when it shifts too far, it always shifts back.
Yeah.
So I think that that is where we sit in the Republican Party right now. Um, we have, we've almost pushed our party so far to the right that it's unrecognizable to regular people. Um, and then we've adopted positions on things like public education that are very much out of step with mainstream conservatives, quite frankly. You know, we were, the voucher fight was so big for me this past cycle. And I was so angry when I would hear the governor tell us that rural Texas absolutely wants vouchers. Y'all support them, 66% or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just absolutely not true. I mean,
Mhm.
it's I mean, the kids call it gaslighting, right? I mean, it just was
Yeah.
pure. And so I think that the Republicans have mainstream voters in this state and in this country are struggling right now.
Mhm.
We can say they're not all we want to, but the truth is that people are having a hard time making ends meet. They're having a hard time figuring out whether their kids are going to get to go to college, whether they can afford, groceries, electricity, insurance.
Mhm.
They're concerned about the future. Our part of the world, farmers and ranchers, is this something that my kids are going to want to do because you can't make any money anymore? So
Yeah.
there's some real things that people are dealing with. And I think that the Republican Party gets further and further away from that every election. And it's inevitable that the pendulum is going to shift. I think that there's a couple of things that I think are out there. And of course, I'm a political scientist by I guess by self-proclamation or whatever. But I don't study polls. I don't, I read a lot and I get a lot of information from lots of different sources, but I'm not, in the weeds like some of these guys are.
Yeah.
But here's my theory. I think that the SD9 race that we just witnessed
Yeah.
um, is a red flag as to what might be happening. That was kind of it was a Republican versus Democrat head to head race.
Mhm.
And what I learned from talking to people on the ground was that very much was a public education vote, and that they were sick of the Republicans abandoning public education. They did not like that particular candidate on the Republican side because she had been a leader in that effort.
Yeah.
And that these parents got together at school board meetings in those school districts and decided that they were going to fight back. And that is a big reason why that outcome was it was. So that's one thing. I also think that so we've seen a recent sort of example, and I don't think this is about Trump. Again, I think
Yeah.
that there's something happening within Texas that has nothing to do with Trump. I mean, Trump
Mhm.
I think, contributes to it, but I think there's something else happening. Um, the other thing I think that you have to sort of think about is we talked about 2018.
Mhm.
This will be a presidential midterm election similar to 2018, right?
Mhm.
Um, and Trump's numbers are pretty similar to where they were. And um, we've seen that maybe there is more Democrat energy than there was. And I think what the Democrats did differently from 2018, probably by design, is they went and recruited a candidate to run in every Texas House
Mhm.
seat and every Texas Senate seat. So
Mhm.
they have a grassroots network of individual candidates that will be running campaigns that they didn't have
Yeah.
when Beto ran in 2018. And those margins were thin.
Yeah.
And of course that was against Cruz, but I think
Mhm.
it it'll be similar.
Yeah.
And especially it will be if Paxton wins the nomination on the Republican side, there will be a lot of Republicans who stay home.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think it could be interesting to see what happens. And I think that it will take a big loss of a statewide seat for the Republican Party to wake up in Texas.
Yeah.
And while I don't want that to happen, I think that is the answer to the problem that we have right now.
Okay.
A
That's a
wake up
really good
call.
point. Yeah, 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 like a little shock, just
Yes.
so that was wonderful. Really good thoughts there. I appreciate that. I want to kind of shift gears here to talk about your advice for any sort of journalism. Like you actually purchased this newspaper. Talk to me about what the importance is of local journalism. Where do you see that going?
Yeah, yeah. So, obviously, I think it's very important. And I now actually have two newspapers. I bought the newspaper next door in the next county over. So, I tell people I'm building a little Texas Panhandle media mogul. Um, but it's very important. The world is full of information. We have information thrown at us all the time. Um, what better trusted source of information, and information and news are different things, in my opinion. What we do in journalism is we take all of this information, and then based on our research and our experience and our firsthand knowledge, we turn that into news so that you don't just get the information, but you actually get it through a lens of why it matters, right? Um, and so that's what a local newspaper does different than somebody sharing stuff on social media or whatever. Um, and then also as a newspaper editor who lives in that community, I'm invested, right? I'm invested in what I'm writing. It matters to me because it's part of, my actual, the system that I live in. Um, and those local issues impact us so much more than what happens in Washington and what happens in Austin. So for that reason, I think it's really important because we need good sources of information from people that we can trust.
Yeah.
And I think that's what keeps our democracy strong and alive. But also, there's two other reasons why I got involved with the newspapers. One is that newspapers are the history books for our communities, and a lot of stuff has gone online. And I believe that online is very important, and it's a component that all newspapers have got to adopt. And I'll talk about that in a second. But that online story is not there in 100 years, like the story that, I actually run a 100-year column in our newspaper that one of my local citizens does for us. And so we go back and we pull a story from 50, 75, 25, whatever years ago, um, because we need to remember who our communities were, and we need to be able to archive that into history. And once these small newspapers go away, all of that goes away. So that's important. But the other thing that's important is it's for local government. Like, we've got to make sure that we're holding our local government accountable, that there's plenty of transparency, that our taxpayer dollars are being used wisely. Um, you know, so there's a lot of really important things. I would consider a newspaper a pillar in the community, right? And it plays a really important role. And as these go away, I think that these communities, sort of go into decline. I think there's a direct connection there. So that's why I take it on, and I would encourage anybody to do it. But you do have to be open and flexible, because the newspaper business today is not what it even was 10 years ago. And so you've got to be willing to adopt the online, the social media presence. I'm experiencing with this Substack newsletter because I guess I actually interviewed a newspaper editor in a neighboring town who's been doing this for like 30 years. And he said, we have to quit talking about our circulation, which is what newspaper people always, brag about, and instead talk about our reach. And he's right, because the print newspaper is one piece of it, but the online's a piece, our newsletter's a piece, all these different components, the social media, it's all a piece of how we're getting out our information, because people get their information from lots of different sources these days. So, but it's a cool business. I mean, I had no idea how much I would love it. And the best people in it.
I'd imagine that, I have to agree with you that a newspaper is one of the big pillars of any given area. It's like the local drugstore or your school, your church, your bank, your post office. One of these essential aspects of the town, of the city. And if one of those things goes under, you start to wonder, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to my town? What's going to happen here? And I think the media here in any given light, whether it's a newspaper or just a mailed newsletter or whatever,
Yes.
has a task and to keep leaders accountable. I love that you said that because sometimes they don't want to be held accountable.
Yeah.
And I'd imagine that there are times where you or someone else is not going to be allowed to come in there, and you're like, hey, wait a second here. There's a First Amendment here. I have to be,
Yeah.
I have to, I owe it to my people, to the people of this area to do this. Have you faced any sort of backlash about trying to cover something and then telling you no?
Um, they haven't really told me no. But they get very uncomfortable when I'm in the room. I guess is the best way to say it. So, um, and what happens, I call it social discipline. I just wrote a post about it in my
Mhm.
community, because what they do is, and I guess it's easier to do this to a woman, but they're like, well, she's just not being nice, right? Like,
Yeah,
and so I have to constantly remind people that city government doesn't have feelings. So, it's government. It doesn't have feelings. So I don't
exactly.
have to be nice to it. I can basically call it out for what it is.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, that is one of the challenges for small town newspaper folks is that we take on a lot of criticism when we're talking about things that maybe some powerful people don't want us talking about.
Yeah.
Um, but I always tell people that I hope that someday someone will look back on the whole body of work of what I've done and say, gosh, I'm glad that Suzanne was telling stories. I'm glad that she was holding our government accountable. And I'm glad that she was keeping our history because I mean, that's what I want, to be the legacy of this newspaper, um, for the future. And I think that, I'm just hopeful that's what I mean, I try to work in that vein, and I think we do a pretty good little product for that.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome. Yeah. And you mentioned about Substack. You've got a
mhm.
Substack. You've got about, double the amount of followers that I have. I'm very jealous. What,
Don't know how.
well, it's because you're just better at it than I am. But what advice do you have to anybody who may want to start this or how to grow
Yeah.
or what, what kind of, thoughts can you give to somebody?
Yeah. Well, number one, I will say we need more voices, especially if you're in rural Texas. Like we need more voices talking about our way of life. And um, I think that what have loved about Substack is it allows you to create a little community
Hmm.
outside of like where you physically live, right? Because there's not, I mean, let's just be honest, there's not a lot of people in Spearman talking about what's happening in Austin, right? Like I
Hmm.
may be the only one. They
Hmm.
talk about it some because I'm writing stuff and I've got a few folks that are, like today I got a couple of texts like how do I vote? Um, you know, so there are people, but it's been really fun to find sort of a community of people that I would have never been in contact with. But I think the key, I mean, I still need to grow my Substack quite a bit, but
Hmm.
the key to Substack is consistency, I believe. Is just getting on there and just writing about the stuff that care about and then, being consistent about what you put out. I try to put out something at least once a week,
Hmm.
which is what I usually run my column. And then we're trying to add podcast and some other pieces to it. But,
Yeah.
it does take a lot of time. I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
if you write a lot too, but
Yeah.
it's hard to write.
Yeah.
There's a lot of vulnerability. There's like, what am I
Mhm.
saying anything that anybody understands? And for someone that's not like a trained writer, it kind of takes me a little time to produce stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think consistency is the key, and then just not be afraid to kind of put it out there because you just never know. I mean, who
Yeah.
would have ever believed that I would build this little following? And I love it because I mean, like, the Speaker of the House is on my Substack list. So, I
Yeah.
mean, I've got influential people that are, and in fact, I got invited to a press conference in Plainview yesterday. I was there
Oh, yeah.
for King press conference
That's right.
because Darby and Stan Lambert and some of those guys, are following what I'm doing and have consider me a trusted voice to talk about rural issues. So
Right.
so anyway, that's yes, I love Substack, and I encourage anybody to that wants to write. It's a perfect place
Right
to
on.
get on and build a community around your writing.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. I will make sure that I have your Substack in the
Oh, good.
notes portion of this podcast so people can go check yours out. Suzanne, thank you so much for joining the Outsider Podcast. It's
Yes.
been a true pleasure to have you on. Any final words you'd like to give?
Gosh, well, I just want to, I mean, we talked a little bit about voting, and of course, I don't know if you'll get this out before Tuesday, but make sure that you're voting Republican or Democrat, whichever party, because I do think that that's how we can stomp out some of this extremism, is if we've got more people participating in the primary process.
That's right.
But otherwise, I just thank you for letting me get an audience with your folks, and I enjoy following you as well. I know you took a break for a while, but so I'm glad you're back.
I did. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
We all need
It,
breaks, I guess.
That's right. Yeah. Well, it's necessary because you have to, clear your head and just
Yeah,
what you mentioned there, you have to kind of reprogram, kind of, restart things in what direction you want to do. Because vulnerability, that is such a big part of this. I mean, you
yeah,
put yourself out there and you're really hoping that you get a niche or some sort of a group of people who might enjoy it. So, and even if not, it's a particular group, you still keep swinging, still keep trying. Maybe somebody, it's vulnerable, and that's a big thing. So,
yeah.
you're exactly right. I couldn't agree more. So, thank you again for being
Very
here,
good.
and I totally appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, Drew. Thank you.
Special shout out to Suzanne Bell Snyder for stopping into the Outsider Podcast to have a great conversation. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Appreciate you, and I'll see you again very, very soon.
The preceding analyses and opinions were that of Drew Landry and his alone. They did not necessarily reflect all of his podcast listeners or newsletter readers. Thank you for listening to the Outsider Podcast. Be sure to follow The Outsider on X and on Facebook. Also, don't forget to sign up to be a free subscriber to his newsletter on Substack. Just look for The Outsider. We will see you again next time.